But the reality is, and the research shows it, children who don't interact with their parents enough, physically and emotionally, and are left in front of technology, have less ability to articulate. They have less good verbal skills. They often have developmental delays in terms of cognitive impairments. And so we're not doing our children any good by leaning into technology too much.
Erica, welcome to the Point of Impact.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been, like I had mentioned off camera, is that I've been devouring your content online, podcasts, your blog articles, and you've got a incredible insight into the I don't know, the human mind, the raising children, your books, being there, and about child mental social development, starting from the first 3 years, and how important motherhood is, and Chicken Little, the sky isn't falling. There's actually, I think you mentioned there was a second byline that you didn't put into the title of that. It was something about second chances. And can you explain a little bit about both the first and second uh, phases of this child development?
Well, I mean, children go through two critical periods of brain development. And when we say brain development, right brain development, the social emotional part of the brain. And the first critical period is 0 to 3, and the second critical period is 9 to 25, or what we call adolescence. Um, and they're critical periods of development because the environment is very influential in those two periods of development. And parents are from 0 to 3 a child's environment, and in adolescence still a very important part of a child's environment. And so basically in 0 to 3 the brain is going through a period of growth, and it overgrows. You'd say by 3 years of age 85% of a child's social emotional brain is developed. If they have a healthy upbringing and they have their irreducible needs for attachment security met, then at 85% at 3 years of age is what we're looking at. But think of an overgrown garden. And so in adolescence, it's a reorganizing and pruning period of that same development. So think of a garden that's overgrown, and then you prune back the garden. The growth period, what we call neurogenesis, and the pruning period are both very important to a child's future mental health. And the right brain, or the social emotional brain, is important for a number of reasons. It's the part of the brain where emotional regulation lives. It's the part of the brain where resilience to stress and adversity lives. It's the part of the brain where the ability to make social connections and read social cues lives. And what we know is that if these parts of the brain don't develop in a healthy manner, it impacts a child's future ability to deal with stress, but also to regulate their emotions. And what we're seeing with this mental health crisis is a lot of kids who have trouble regulating their emotions and managing stress.
So, from what you're saying, that if we're not present during those first 3 years, it's not all lost. We still have a
Yeah.
chance to make those connections, to uh, help our children develop those social connections, the interpersonal skills. And what about the in between periods, that 3 to 9? That's what's happening in this period.
So it's also important, just because it's not considered a critical period of brain development. Freud called it the latency period because he said it's when the brain is in a more stable state, which it is, but it's also building things like competency and self-esteem based on competency. It's the period of development which is really undervalued as well. Maybe I'll write a book on that period next, which is, um, and it's also a period where parents actually do a lot of harm to their children or can help their children, because you would say from 3 to 9 is a real self-esteem building part of the brain. And what I mean by that is, for a parent to help a child with their self esteem is not just to tell them how wonderful they are at everything and how great they are and how fabulous they are. It's not just to focus on their strengths, it's also to help them to manage their disappointments, their rejections, their vulnerabilities, and their weaknesses, right? So their limitations. So we all have limitations, right? So telling your child that they can do anything and they're the most beautiful, is not helpful. Telling them that you love how they play the piano, or you are so admire them, in terms of how they handle themselves with their friends, or how they, their ability to write an essay at school is amazing. It admiring their strengths is a very important part of self-esteem building and what we call competency building, because this is the period where children start to understand what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, what I like and what I don't like. um, so I think we've become a society. It's funny because you could say that 100 years ago, parents believed that you should never tell your children what they're good at. So the pendulum swings. And then came the period of telling children in a very narcissistic way that they're good at everything and there's nothing they can't do. That's not healthy. Meaning we all have limitations. And so good self-esteem, my self-esteem, your self-esteem, every child's self-esteem is based on the idea that I'm good at some things and I'm not good at others.
I'm reminded of Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, where her father continuously told her that she was no genius until she brought home the Genius Award.
Right.
But it's it wasn't an insult. It was a reminder that perhaps you can be and do all the anything you want, but it's up to you to actually do it. It doesn't come because you are the best right now.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
you've got to develop those skills, the mindset, that those abilities. So, in what what I'm hearing you say is, instead of telling a child that you're the best, smartest, bravest, biggest, whatever it is, fastest, you you said, I love how much effort you're putting into that, or I love how you're trying. Keep doing that because you're going to get better and better.
Well, also, you can do things that you enjoy without having to be great at them. You can play soccer and not be, I mean, a child can come home and say, I suck at soccer. And you can say, well, tell me how you feel, why you feel that way. And listen to them and say, I understand. So maybe you're not the best on the team, but do you still like it? And if they say, I still like it, then you can encourage them to do it because they like it, not because they have to be the best. I mean, we've told our kids that they have to be the best, and they are the best. First, we've told them they are the best before they've done anything, and then we tell them that they have to be the best. To the extent that self esteem is a fragile thing now. It's not meant to be fragile, it's meant to be kind of very kind of resilient self-esteem, right? And so the only way that you're really that you have that kind of bendable, flexible, strong self-esteem is because you do know what you're not good at and you know what you're good at. I mean, I can't do math past algebra. I mean, I don't think I took math past algebra 2 in high school and college, but I was an excellent writer. And I was very good at the humanities. So I let it go. I said, I don't have to be great at math. My scores on math don't have to be good. That's not my strength. It's not what my interest is. I'm not interested in it. But what I am interested in is writing and analyzing literature. So it's the idea that, helping children to grapple with both their strengths and their limitations is what really good self esteem is based on.
How much influence do parents have on on a child's psyche, on the children's, on their kids' self-esteem, and other cognitive functions? Maybe this is the nature versus nurture question, but is when it comes to both parents, being a father, and
Mm-hmm.
your first book being about the importance of motherhood. Uh, how much influence do both parents, one parent, have on the child's development?
Well, both parents are critical to a child's development, which brings up the issue of what happens when children only have one parent, or one really present parent, because they serve different purposes. Fathers and mothers serve different purposes in terms of children's development, and they nurture children differently. So we don't want to hear this because it goes against the grain of saying that we're all the same and gender is a neutral thing, and these are all social constructs, father and mother, but they're not social constructs. They're evolutionary constructs based on hormones that we have that then affect our nurturing behavior. So mothers produce a lot of something called oxytocin when they give birth and breastfeed and nurture their young. And it's what we call the sensitive empathic nurturing hormone. It's the love hormone. And it helps in the process of attachment, but it also provides that child with that sensitive empathic nurturing, which is the foundation of their resilience, right? And basically assures attachment security over a 3 year period. Fathers, when they produce oxytocin, when they nurture their young, because today fathers will stay home with their young, it comes from a different part of the brain, and it still makes fathers more what we call playful, tactile stimulators of babies, throwing the baby up in the air, tickling the baby, chasing the baby around. Fathers are the love objects of play for children, and play is critical for exploration, for separation, to develop resilience in other ways. But in the very beginning, it's sensitive, empathic nurturing that's critical to children. And fathers introduce the idea of tactile, playful stimulation, but that is not the primary developmental thing in the first 3 years. But in introducing it, fathers introduce the idea of separating from mothers. So when we see a lot of these single mother families, we always have, but in the past, single mother families still had fathers. Today, mothers are going out and getting sperm from sperm banks and having babies, and so there are no fathers. And the problem with not even having a father in your imagination is you don't have that playful, tactile stimulator who helps with separation. So we're seeing these children are struggling with separation, right? They'll sleep with their mothers until they're 5. They don't develop the same kind of resilience. They don't develop the same capacity to regulate aggression. So we know that mothers regulate feelings like sadness and distress and fear. Fathers regulate excitement and aggression. And so they're equally important, but at different times in development, but they're not the same.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. And our audience is a vast majority male, and
Uh huh.
uh, from a father's perspective, yeah, there's that. Uh, I know it's a huge role. It's an important role for child development, but when you're talking about oxytocin, and it comes from breast milk, but it's also something that is, we deliver, uh, we we manufacture ourselves, and that's the sense of community, right? That empathy feeling. It's another one of the so-called reward
Yep.
neurochemicals. We this is correct me if I'm wrong. This is the one we get even when we the sense of that feeling we get when somebody smiles at us, and uh, when we're connecting with our children, like you said, tossing them around, tickle fights, roughhousing. And my three boys, they're getting big fast. So I'm not going to be able to win those tickle fights much longer. But uh, I wanted to get into the masculinity question because
Hmm.
I want to be careful here because I don't want to get into the politics of it, but like you said, it's not a social construct. This is a
No.
biological construct. And the necessity of a man to a father to pass on actual masculinity, advice, toxic masculinity, which I don't believe is actually masculinity. It's just toxic.
Prudeness. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, fathers. I just want to say something to finish the thought, the incomplete thought about fathers and mothers. That fathers and mothers are different, but what's happening today is they are reversing roles. Fathers are staying home and nurturing children, and mothers are going out to work. And if we're going to do that, which is, switching around a kind of evolutionary paradigm, then we have to still treat children the same way in terms of their need for certain things at certain times in development. So, fathers who are instinctually bound to the idea of play as a way to interact with their children have to learn they have to learn sensitive empathic nurturing. Meaning, when the baby falls down in the playground, mothers will run and say, "Oh, sweetheart, let me give you a hug. How are you feeling? I see you got a boo boo. Let me kiss the boo boo." Fathers generally won't do that. They'll go over and say, "Come on, honey, you're fine. You're good. Leo, come on, brush yourself off. Let's go back to play."
Rub some
They'll do
dirt in
this
it, you'll be fine.
distraction technique. Yeah. So then, if fathers are going to stay home, then they need to understand that they need to run over to the baby and kiss the boo boo and give a hug and say, "Honey, how are you?" And not rush them along. So, if we're going to switch things around, which is a societal paradigm, the whole idea of reversing gender roles, that's a societal paradigm. But gender roles themselves, in terms of nurturing behaviors, is an evolutionary. It would be like saying to two rats, a mother and a father, "Okay, we're going to switch you around. You've had this evolutionary nurturing behavior for, or lions, we're going to tell you, mother lion, that you're going to be the male and the male's going to be the female." We have evolutionary ties as mammals to the way we behave. I mean, a lot of the research in the field of attachment security is human research, but a lot of it's animal research, mammal research. We're just animals. We're just mammals. These aren't societal constructs. They are evolutionary patterns that we are bound to. So it's sort of disturbing to hear people reduce nurturing and the way we nurture and the way we've nurtured for thousands of years as a societal construct. And it's also incorrect. So let's talk about masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic. And masculinity is necessary, just like a father lion is going to protect his young from predators. So maybe we don't have as many predators because we don't live in nature. You as a father aren't protecting your children from other lions, right? And yet, that instinct to protect your children comes from a hormone that men produce a lot of called vasopressin. That is not a toxic masculinity. That is a protective, aggressive hormone that produces a protective response. And there are many instances in which that is still very important. There was a study done in England where a mother and father lay in bed, and the baby cries a distress cry, human baby cries, and the father sleeps through it. But the mother wakes up immediately, is vigilant to the distress of the baby and to soothe the baby in distress. But when there's rustling of leaves outside the window, the father wakes up and the mother sleeps through it. Now, why am I telling you that? Because that's an evolutionary response. That's not a societal construct. Um, Having said that, I think what's happened is we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, I think is the expression, in saying that there are aspects of masculinity in society that have the pendulum has swung too far. Maybe the sexism, maybe the crudeness. In saying that, I think we've tried to, with a very big brush, paint all of masculinity as bad. And what I'm going to say is masculinity is not bad. We are doing a number on our sons, our little boys and our sons, by telling them it's bad. It's very confusing to them to be told that being masculine is bad. And the irony of all ironies, and maybe the paradox of all of this, is that after the feminist movement, women were told to be more like men. So they were they were told to be more masculine and more aggressive like men. So, I would say that there is some part of masculinity today that may be unhealthy, but I don't think masculinity as a whole is toxic.
I think you mentioned this in an article about us punishing boys for being boys.
Hmm.
And they have to learn. They have to roughhouse, they have to go break things, they have to go,
They do.
figure out some of these things with their buddies, and they ought to get in trouble. Otherwise, they won't learn how to be, you know, did, and this is true for adults as well. We need to learn how to make mistakes so we can, avoid making the same mistakes twice. But that means we need to fail. And I think uh, a similar concept was mentioned, was talked about by Dr. Jordan Peterson. He was talking about uh, the monster in boys and men, and it's not about destroying the monster. It's about acknowledging and training the monster. Um, so, it, masculinity is something to strive for because it's the proper role for boys, men, or someone in the father role, and something for a son to learn how to become. But you talked about how it's a generational thing, and we are, for better or worse, products of our previous generation, and we can just go back generation after generation uh, to see kind of a linear development of where we've come from and where we are today. Do you, where do you see us going? Like, like you mentioned, I think it's right at the top of your website, building a more secure future, or raising a more secure future. Is that what we're doing?
No, no, we certainly are not doing that. Yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing is if you read about boys and masculinity and what fathers do for boys, you would understand too that boys produce a tremendous amount of testosterone when they're little. Between the ages of 3 and 6, they produce a ton of testosterone, almost as much as when they go through adolescence. And so that means that they are impulsive, aggressive, um, in ways that we judge them, because we judge them as little girls. The ability to sit quietly in circle time at a younger and younger age is sort of trying to take a square peg and put it into a round hole, and it makes little boys go off the rails when you try to hold little boys' energy too tightly. I mean, little boys need to really explore the world physically before the age of 6. So one thing is that we start preschool too early, and we put children in daycare under the age of 3. All of these things are restricting to children's need to play, particularly little boys, and we judge them and we label them. We put them in boxes as having a problem when they're high energy and aggressive. And um, having said that, it is fathers who regulate or help little boys to learn to regulate their aggression. And if fathers are not around enough, so what's happened too in recent years is that fathers are starting to understand their role as fathers is actually important, that it's important to be around. I mean, funny enough, 75 years ago, fathers were around more. They would be home by 6 o'clock, like Leave It to Beaver, and they would be there, playing baseball in the yard, going to their kids' baseball games or soccer games or football games, and hanging out with their boys in the evenings and shooting hoops in the driveway. Then came this period of work before everything, material achievement and success before everything, where work was put before family. And little boys were the first ones who were abandoned and needed their fathers, and their fathers were not present. Their fathers would work until 7, 8, would travel for work, um, fathers who were poor were working 2 and 3 jobs. There was an increase in divorce and the rise of single parent families, so fathers weren't around. But basically, these little boys didn't have anybody to show them how to regulate angry feelings and aggressive feelings, and how to regulate excitement, because little boys also just get really excited. And that's part of emotional regulation. If fathers aren't around enough for little boys, they don't learn how to regulate aggression. And there's a greater chance that they will be labeled.
So when they should be uh, roughhousing and playing around, or yeah, doing these natural human interactions with other adults, with other children, well, we're putting them in these boxes, telling them to be quiet and pay attention, or sitting them in front of boxes, and we're giving them an overload of dopamine, as mentioned
We're
before.
stressing them out. Yeah, we're basically putting them into high stress mode. You know, what you're really trying to do to the greater extent is to reduce levels of cortisol in children who are under the age of 6. And if you can keep the cortisol levels relatively low under the age of 6, then they incrementally learn to cope with stress as time goes on. But if you introduce them to too much stress too early, and what we're doing is separating mothers and babies at too early an age, which is causing very young infants to go into a kind of stress mode, high levels of cortisol in their bodies. And then they get to the school years of 3 to 6, preschool years, and we're making them sit quietly, learning letters and numbers and doing left brain kind of cognitive development with them before they're capable, which stresses them out, again, raises their cortisol levels. We don't really understand that attachment, security, and play, and your physical and emotional presence, whether you're mother or father, in the first 6 years, is the most important thing if you want to give them a good foundation for the future. And I would say for little boys, they are more neurologically sensitive than little girls. There's a lot of research to show that boys are, in the world, more boys are born, but more girls survive. And the reason for that is they are very fragile, both physically and neurologically, little boys. And so when they are either put in daycare, or when they are neglected, benignly neglected by one parent or the other, they they develop these stress reactions. We're seeing them, fight or flight. So we see signs of unregulated aggression, hitting and biting in school, and also the flight mode, which is distractibility. So all these little boys are getting diagnosed with ADHD, and the world is just accepting it. Oh, well, every little boy must have ADHD. I'm like, no, no, no. These are stress reactions that we are ignoring, and not really even questioning what's causing the stress, right? So you have a great opportunity under the age of 6 to give your child a foundation for the future. And I think most parents don't take advantage of those years to give children that foundation.
That's interesting. So preschool, that 3 to 6 age frame. We're putting them in school, and or preschool, and that's actually detrimental.
Well, I mean, we can put them in preschool from 3 to 6. If you're going to do 3 to 6 preschool, then you want to make sure you don't do it for too many hours a day, too many days a week at 3. So, what I always recommend is if you can find a preschool, don't do daycare at all. Children do not need to be put in group environments before 3. They need the attachment security, and they need to be in the physical and emotional presence of their primary attachment figure for the most part from 0 to 3. At 3, they can go into preschool, but just a minimal number of hours a week. I think what we do is we put our kids in like it's daycare. They'll start at 3 from 9 to 3, and that just stresses children out who have been home with their mothers, and now you're throwing them into this group environment and forced separation. So you wean is the word, right? Just like we wean children from breastfeeding, you wean them from the attachment by slowly integrating the idea of drop off programs at 3, but slowly, and then we build up. So maybe by 4, they can do 4 or 5 hours a day. But, you know, everything in America is over the top, right? The circus, NBA games, everything has become over the top.
Hmm.
And so it's the same with school and, daycare. It's the idea that instead of thinking of preschool from 3 to 6 as an incremental weaning away from attachment, we throw them into these stressful situations as if they're adults, as if they can handle it like you would be able to handle it. Not even imagining. As you said, empathy lives in the right brain. So, what has happened to parents today that they can't see that handing their child over to a stranger in daycare at 6 weeks is not right? How can they not feel the pain of their children when they put them into preschool for 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day when they're tiny, tiny children? So it's almost as if there's an empathic, a generational expression of attachment disorders and empathic impairment in young parents today, where they can't even feel the pain of their children. And that's the most disturbing part for me.
Well, let's talk about that other uh, babysitter we have. The the video games, screen time, computers, and the TV, and how that's contributing to anxiety, detachment, and children's development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, technology, according to the American Pediatric Association, you shouldn't be introducing any kind of technology to your children before the age of 2. That means when you're in the stroller, when the baby's in the stroller, don't hand them your iPhone. It means don't give them an iPad. It means don't plop them in front of television or the computer, right? Until the age of 2, they should have no exposure to technology. After 2, the idea is to, from the very beginning, limit it as much as possible, because technology is designed, not to make it sound sinister, but there is something a little sinister about designing technologies that um, create a kind of addictive response in children's brains and adolescents' brains. And there is something a little sinister about that. So, in the name of business, in the name of profits, to design an algorithm that seduces young children and then addicts them to the technology is a little bit sinister. Having said that, it is up to parents to regulate that technology. Those companies don't live in your house with you. They're not forcing you to turn on, to give the children the iPad, or to, they're offering something, and maybe they shouldn't be. But it's parents who ultimately have the last say as to whether they expose their children and how much they expose their children. And I think parents get lazy today, to be honest. Young parents just are fatigued from working, two parent working families, and then having families, and then just they come home and they just go, I'm exhausted, here, take the iPad, here, you can watch TV for 4 hours. And so I think it is a bit of laziness, because in our day we didn't have that option, right? When we were raising our kids, and our kids are healthier, the generations are getting less and less healthy. So what I would say is resist as much as possible and as long as possible technology in terms of introducing it to children. And then when it comes to phones, do not give them a smartphone until at least 16 years of age. You can give them a flip phone, or they have these children's Google phones. You can give them until 16. But like Jonathan Haidt says in his book, do not give them a smartphone until they are 16 years of age at all. No social media until they are 16. Limit the amount of time that they are on their video games from the very beginning when you give them the video game. Giving them a video game when they are a young adolescent is, you need to know that their brains will have a tenfold dopamine reaction to that video game than your adult brain. And so that makes addiction more likely in a child. But to implement boundaries, you have to implement them from the very beginning. And then you need to really stay on top of it. And as I said, I think it's used, as you said, as a babysitter, and it's not regulated.
Well, we're just now learning about the effects. Yeah, so our understanding is starting to catch up to the technology. So for those of us out there that are just realizing what we're doing, what are the residual effects? You were talking about uh, there's addictive qualities of screen time, and how does that carry over? And what about the uh, other developmental aspects like vocabulary and communication skills and critical thinking and social skills? How, even if, what are the residual effects?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of research to show that technology at an early age can impair. It's funny because I grew up in the generation where parents put their children in front of Sesame Street and the electric company. And the truth is that I'm sure there were a lot of children that learned how to speak from Sesame Street and and the electric company. But the reality is, and the research shows it, that children who don't interact with their parents enough, physically and emotionally, and are left in front of technology, have less ability to articulate. They have less good verbal skills. They have often have developmental delays in terms of cognitive impairments. And so, we're not doing our children any good by leaning into technology too much. Now, having said that, technology is also not the devil. it can be used for good. If your father or mother are traveling for work, in the old days you'd get a phone call. Now you get a Zoom call or a FaceTime call. And so that allows you to see your parent. If your parent is going to be away, better that you see them than not. So there's a good use of technology. Or in divorce situations where you can do a Zoom call with your parent or a FaceTime call. So there are good uses of technology. There's good educational software. But, like everything, we don't stop at the good. We keep going and keep going until too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And certainly the the invention of social media was definitely not a good thing for children for so many reasons. So yeah, I mean, I think that not all technology is bad, but I would say technology needs to be regulated, and that regulation, although I'd like to say it should come from the companies, yes, of course they should be involved, it must come from parents. And sometimes when I hear the world saying, oh, social media is the reason kids are breaking down, the first thing I think of is everybody wants something external to blame
Yeah, I think would it
because
come?
they don't want to take responsibility for parenting.
I was about to say the
And
same
they
thing
want to
though.
have some external reason for that their children are breaking down. Well, it's just the social media, then our kids would be fine. I hate to tell you, but if the social media goes away, which it never is going to go away. So the idea is that you're going to have to create resilient children in spite of the technology. You're going to have to create resilient children in spite of the end of the world scenarios about climate change. You're going to have to create resilient children in spite of the fact that there's drugs and alcohol that's so strong that's making kids break down in rapid numbers. But so all of these things are external. So, and we're not going to be able to change all the environmental factors, right? The variables. And that means that a parent's physical and emotional presence throughout childhood is even more critical now with all of these environmental adversities and factors, because what we can do is build resilient children who can manage these stressors, because we're not going to get rid of all the stressors. We are just not.
Talking about being in that previous generation of Sesame Street and the Electric Company, and yeah, we have all this technology now, and I think it's allowed us or made us led us to believe that we can uh, delegate or abdicate our own responsibility for raising our children and their safety and their security. I mean, so many examples. Technologies such as I didn't wear a helmet ever when I was riding a bike when I was a kid. Uh, but then my mom, she was a great mom, attentive mother, and she definitely did the whole "oh poor baby, you got a boo boo" thing when I was little. But then she also said, "Okay, now shake it off and go back out there and play." Whereas as a grandmother, I remember just the boy's last birthday, she sent helmets, elbow pads, knee pads, shin guards, and even those palm guard things for the boys' hands so that they could ride their first bikes without training wheels. And I thought, wait a second, what have we done to ourselves? You know, I think this is my personal belief that if you want to reduce the number of uh, traffic incidents, car accidents, remove the safety belt from the driver's seat. Better yet, put them outside the crumple zone and see how much safer they drive, how undistracted they're going to be. I think we have, like you said, gone a little too far with the technology. This is a personal opinion, but when it comes to screen time, this is really having long-term effects on our kids. And it's not just the effects of the screens themselves and whatever the media companies or the algorithms are trying to do. Uh, you mentioned um, the addictive qualities, and we're training them to be addicted. So when they move on from the video games, what do they move to? Or uh, there's also the opportunity cost. What are they sacrificing during that time that we're putting them in front of a video game or a TV, that interactive play? So what do you recommend as far as, I know you said no, smartphones till the kids are 16 and no social media. Uh, what are some other things? I know,
Reducing the amount of time that they play video games. So video games keep children from going out and playing. And one of the issues is that, and I always suggest to parents that they form communities of like-minded parents, meaning if they go to a school, choose a school if you have the ability where you have like-minded parents, or form a community of like-minded parents, meaning get all the parents of the children who your children play with together and talk about, as a community, what are your values and what are you going to stand by. And that means, because really, if one child doesn't have a smartphone but everybody else does, then that child feels deprived. But if all the children don't have smartphones till 16, if all the children have a rule that they can't play more than an hour of video games a day during the week, or maybe there's no video games during the week, and on the weekends they get 2 hours a day, and that's it, when they're teenagers. If everybody has a similar value system, then it's easier for kids when they're the only one on the block who doesn't have a television, or doesn't have a smartphone, or isn't allowed to play video games during the week. It's harder. There's strength in numbers as parents. And again, I think we've lost community too, because this is the kind of thing where communities, people would go to PTA meetings and communities would agree on a similar value system. And now everybody's so individualistic in their own little beehive of their house in the suburbs or whatever, or they're too busy with their outside work to focus on what other parents are doing with their children. But the problem is, if you don't focus on what other parents are doing with your children, then your children are exposed to other kids. Again, creating community with a similar value system and creating a structure. Yeah, that's a way to think about technology, and to think about, and video games has basically replaced in-person play. Kids still play with each other on video games, but they play with each other remotely from their dark rooms with the doors shut and the lights out. And again, they've done studies to show that if you sit an adolescent 9 to 25 next to an adult playing video games, the adolescents have a tenfold reaction to dopamine response than the adults. And so, which is why, so an adult may have a moderate response, but a child will have an intense response, which is why it's so addictive for kids, right? So, yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, my oldest believes that I'm a bit draconian when it comes to this topic. Uh, he is the only 13-year-old in the entire universe that does not yet have a cell phone, and uh, it still has parental restrictions on his internet access with the computer. But it is certainly a challenge when they can go right out the door to one of their buddies' houses and get that fix. So it's not just family interactions, but then developing a stronger community, social network. So I mean, of course, to have a you know healthy society we need to be and act and do as a healthy society does. That makes perfect sense. It seems like we've strayed quite a long way, and again, not to add politics to this, but these seem like conservative, traditional family values of community and the nuclear family. But
again, it's so interesting because I hate to bring politics in because really,
this is
I'm
everybody.
truly a centrist and I'm not a conservative and I'm not a dyed in the wool liberal. I would say, if anything, I lean more towards liberal social values. So, what's interesting about this is that it's not political. What it is benign neglect, and you can be negligent on either side of the aisle. That's the truth. You have negligent parents on
Mm-hmm.
either side, conservative or liberal. So, yeah, the idea is that children. I'm not sure either party has a is really that invested in children. To be honest, they both talk a big game, but think about it. We're the only country other than Papua New Guinea in the world that doesn't have paid leave, so mothers can stay home with their children in the first 3 years. The Republicans call it an entitlement and say we won't pay for it. Oh, yes, we're family values people, but we won't pay for it. And the Democrats say, well, we would love it for a few months, but we wouldn't want to derail women's careers. So, nobody really cares about children in this country. That's the truth. That's why I write the books and the articles I write, to sort of wake people up, a little bit of cold water in your face to say, actually, none of you care about children. If you really cared about children, we would have a paid leave in this country and you would, both sides of the aisle would agree on it, that it's a right. And then parents would get together and say no to the technology companies who are seducing children, and they would be present enough to regulate the technology themselves. So I would call it neglect on either side of the aisle. I'm not sure we really care about children in this
Well,
country.
that's never more apparent than age restrictions. Driving at 16, owning a firearm, smoking or drinking alcohol, or
That's right.
enlisting, registering for military service. But then the age for consent on the internet is 13. And
Well, I was going to say that. I mean, that's it. I mean, people are giving guns to their. I mean, so yeah. Again, I'm thinking. I don't know. I mean, I really don't think that either party is really cares about kids. And I agree with you. It is crazy that you can, be on social media, have a smartphone. It's not illegal. Um, yeah, I think it's crazy.
additionally, with that, even if there is an age restriction, there's absolutely no oversight on it. All a child of any age needs to do is check a box that says, yes, I am old enough to access this material. And that's only for the worst kind of material online. The rest of it, it's a giant dopamine candy store. So uh, I'm right there with you. Uh, uh, Erica, I really appreciate your insights, your expertise, and sharing with our audience. As we wrap up here, I want to ask you uh, a couple questions that are a final segment called the Countdown to Impact. And these are three things that have impacted your life. Three books, two quotes, and one person.
Oh my goodness! Off the bat, 3 books. John Bowlby's book on attachment. Um, Melanie Klein's work on children's defenses. And gosh, that's really tough. Daniel Stern's book on the interpersonal life of infants. And what did you say? Three
Three
books,
books,
two
two quotes,
two
or maybe
quotes.
rules of thumb or guidelines, because
Yeah.
I'm terrible with
So
quotes.
yeah. So C.S. Lewis said that children are not a distraction from the more important work of life. They are the most important work of life. And Fred Rogers similarly said, it's interesting, he said that play with children is not a distraction from more important work. Play is the work of children. So, um, and what was the last
One person
two
that's had an
quotes?
influence in your life.
One person. Oh my goodness. I would have to say the most influential person in my life was probably my own mother, because in spite of the fact that she was imperfect, as we all are, she
That's
was
fantastic.
incredibly
I really
loving.
appreciate it. We'll have to look up the
Yeah,
title of
loving and
those books
nurturing.
and put them in the notes. But I love it, and I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have a difficulty narrowing down one person. I might have to switch the order there. Uh, but um, I love that you mentioned that your mom's imperfect, and all parents are. We don't have to get it right all the time. We just have to
That's
dedicate
right.
ourselves to doing
You
the
have to
best we
try
can
really
and trying
hard.
to improve. Well, Erica, thank you one more time. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with the point of impact.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great day.